Let's take a deep dive into the trenches at the Senior Bowl with our guy, Parker Blake, who is there in person and is ready to offer his insight.
You are Locked On Bengals, your daily Cincinnati Bengals podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What up, Bengals fans, and welcome to another episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. We're keeping things focused on the Senior Bowl for the fourth straight day. Senior Bowl, a big event, of course, in the offseason. Usually we're talking about Bengals football, at least the last couple of years around this time of year. But this year we get to talk about the Senior Bowl, and Parker Blake was down in Mobile. We're going to take a deep dive into the trenches today in an episode brought to you by PrizePicks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Check it out at prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL. Use promo code LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. I'm your host, Jake Bliscoe. He's your host, James Rapine. Like I said, joined today by Parker Blake, who is ready to talk trench guys, trench play in Mobile, Alabama. Parker, this is your first trip to the Senior Bowl?
Yeah, it sure was, man. I've been wanting to go for a long time, but it just worked out that I was able to. Now I got to find a way to get back next year, but it was a blast.
Yeah, let's discuss that aspect a little bit. Did it live up to the hype for you? I'm sure there was a lot of anticipation. I've never been to the Senior Bowl, been to the Combine a bunch, heck, made it to the Super Bowl before the Senior Bowl. So what's it like down there?
Yeah, no, it was funny because I was spent, like, I feel like my main mission, it even extended through like day 2, but I was like, I have to find someone else that's their first year. Because everyone I talked to, like, oh, I've been coming for 15 years, 20 years. I can't remember how long I've been coming. And I was like, man, like, am I the only newbie down here? But like, it was funny because everyone kept telling me it wasn't like, oh, the prospects this year are better. Oh, you got a great year to come down. It was like, man, what a year to be your first year. This is the best weather we've had in like decades. And we were all laughing because on day 2, in day 3 was bad, but everybody was just sunburned because no one expected, to get sunburned in January, especially even down in Alabama. So, but I mean, I had a blast. It lived up to my expectations. I had a great time watching. I met a lot of great people. And I got the film last year from the Senior Bowl, but being there and being in person, being able to focus on what I wanted to focus on, even some of the interactions with coaches they don't really get to see, that really was just what I was there for. And I'm glad I got, the most out of that.
What's the difference for you seeing the guys in person, seeing the one-on-ones in person with offensive line, defensive line, the team drills in person versus the film perspective for you in your experience last week?
Yeah, so I feel like when you're watching the film, people just assume that, you get the all 22 angles, you get the close angles, but you don't really get a good sense of like actual game speed on film. I know that doesn't really make a lot of sense, but like seeing these guys move, how smooth they move, and the minutia and what they're doing can kind of get covered up on film with just a couple angles that you get. So honestly, getting that side angle, especially the one-on-ones, and as the days went on, I got a little higher up in the stand so I could get even a better bird's eye view. But watching hands a little bit better, watching how smooth they're moving, and just kind of like the mentality some of these guys took into it. I talked a lot about how I felt all week the national team really lacked energy on both sides of the ball. Like, there wasn't a lot of energy. And you want to, especially with the D-line, you want to see some of these guys, really be passionate about what they're doing. And I know that sounds dumb because they're going to the NFL. They're that level of prospect. But you want them to be passionate about what they're doing and get excited or be frustrated. And that's where there was a lot of talk about, Justin, what was his last name? The LSU defensive tackle who ripped off Christian Haynes' helmet. And everyone's like, oh, that's a big red flag for scouts. But honestly, that group was like in a slump for 2 days straight. And they actually had to come together in the middle of one-on-ones. They brought everybody together and they talked for a good like 10, 15 minutes. And then they reset and got back at it. And they came out with a lot more tenacity and energy.
Jordan Jefferson.
I knew I was way off with that one. It didn't even sound right.
Close to Justin Jefferson.
Just close to, and I remembered that. And that's why I went for Justin. But anyway, yeah, I think the energy is the big thing that you don't really get. I don't think it's a technique thing as much. It's just really feeling how the guys play. And that's what I like focusing on.
Is there one guy that you were really super low on or not as high on as consensus, and then you got there and you saw him in person, and heck, maybe you talked to him or you saw him just moving around, and then practice where you were like, oh, now I get it? Because I do think that that's the benefit you get from going and seeing him in person. And certainly that's something I think the NFL Combine is for too, is for these scouts and evaluators just to see and interact with the prospects and what a difference it can make for some of those fringe guys that might have decent film, but some scouts might be lower on that consensus.
So Patrick Paul was a guy that a lot of people were really high on, including myself. I wasn't low on him per se, but his profile was so like either really, really top end or really, really low end, because I thought on film he really struggled athletically. He has all that length. And so what he would do is he'd reach outside of his frame and was really grabby. I'm like, this dude's going to be a penalty magnet in the league. And so I came down with a ton of questions. I actually tried talking to him a bunch. And I really focused on him during a lot of his reps. The first guy I watched in film was Patrick Paul. I just really wanted to figure out what he was as a prospect throughout this whole process. He was one of my main guys. And I think he did a lot for me to really solidify, his profile and kind of get me there with him.
And where did you land? Where were you before? Where were you after? And what were the things that changed your perspective on where he should be evaluated?
Yeah, I mean, I had him as a top 10 guy. Obviously, he has the size. And
tackle, not overall.
At tackle. Okay. Sorry. Not overall. I still had him as like a top 25 guy, first round guy, easy, just because of the size, of the pedigree. But his athleticism worried me, and like I said, his technique. And so watching him play, I think I can see him now as a top 5 guy. I think I currently have him as a top 5 tackle in my rankings, and I'd say he's a top 15 prospect in my eyes. I don't know if a lot of people are going to see him that way, but just from talking to him and listening to what he's been focusing on, I think he's very self-aware about his flaws and his strengths. And I think Duke, the guy Manyweather, who he's training with, is allowing him, like helping him see those flaws and see those issues. And I really think he's focused on improving. I don't know. It sounds weird. Again, it sounds weird. All these guys should be, but I think he's really locked in, and that really helped me get there with him.
You think that the Bengals should target him at 18 potentially? Obviously, we don't know who's there, but you would list him as, and let's be honest here, our listeners, me and Jake, and we've heard of Patrick Paul, but a lot of our listeners are getting to know these guys. You think that's someone that they should at least highlight or put a star next to as a potential candidate for that 18th pick?
Yeah, so he played left tackle at Houston. And I've talked about I think we all had this discourse last year, but when you're transitioning from left to right tackle, I've always said it's a lot easier to project a better athletic profile to switch. And I still don't think he's there athletically. We'll see how he tests. But just watching him move around and even talking to him, people ask him like, oh, are you working both? Are you anticipating trying to just land somewhere at both? And he seems very adamant that he's a lot more comfortable staying at left. I think the best answer I heard was, I'm more than happy to play right tackle, but it's definitely going to take me a lot longer to get there. And so I don't think the Bengals will target him purely for that reason, I think it's a good idea. I don't think he'd transition well to the right. I think he is a left tackle. I mean, I'd love to have him in behind Orlando Brown. That's a guy that could definitely help him figure it out in the league, but he'd be a bench rider in my opinion.
Real quick, just a fun fact about him. He's Chris Paul's younger brother, but not that Chris Paul, ladies and gentlemen. The Chris Paul that was a 7th round pick for the Washington Commanders a few years ago. So just for those wondering, it is Chris Paul's younger brother, but not the Chris Paul that's an NBA star and going to be a Hall of Famer one day.
And just to add on to that, someone actually asked him about that on the field after a practice. They're like, oh, you asked him, I'm trying to remember how they phrased the question, but it was like super vague. And like everyone around started looking around at each other and was like, oh, like Chris, like that Chris Paul. And so we ended up Googling it on the field, and we're like, oh, like I don't know why they got us all excited over that, but that's funny. Little fun fact there. I love that.
There's some higher profile guys, more well-known names. Anyway, I did not expect us to be starting with Patrick Paul, but some guys that the Bengals will be considering that we can talk about, highlighted by a guy that I know you've got some feelings about, Parker and Tyler Guyton. We'll get to some of those names coming up next.
Today's show is brought to you by Nissan. Are you the kind of driver that likes to push things a little further? You probably are. If you're like me, you certainly are. Well, if you ever wondered what adventure could be around the next corner, our friends at Nissan have the perfect lineup of SUVs with the capabilities to take your adventure to the next level. And the 2024 Nissan Rogue is perfect. It's a mid-size crossover, perfect for your next adventure. And they have Google built in that's has an updating assistant that is going to update you, whether it's your calls, whether it's keeping you in the right spot. And you're not going to have to worry about connecting to your phone. No, they have Google Assistant, Google Maps, Google Play, all built in to your Nissan Rogue, along with a 12.3-inch touchscreen. They also have the Nissan Pathfinder with room up to 8. This is the one that I have my eye on. I'm not going to lie to you. It's a 4x4 capability as well, 284 horsepower, 6,000 pounds of towing. Yeah, this is up my alley. So whether you're interested in the Pathfinder, the Armada, which is a full-size SUV that also sits up to 8, or a Nissan Rogue, Nissan has something for you. Take the Nissan Rogue, Pathfinder, or Armada and go for your next big adventure. Shop nissanusa.com. Today's show is also brought to you by Schultz Jewelers. Valentine's Day is right around the corner. It is quickly approaching. It's next week. So you know what you need to do? You need to get the Schultz Jewelers right now because they have exactly what you're looking for. Maybe you don't even know what you're looking for. Well, that's the beauty of it because you're listening to this podcast. So you're probably a Bengals fan, and so is Matt Schultz. So you can chop it up about the Bengals, discuss who they're going to take with the 18th pick, and he can help guide you and find the right piece of jewelry for her. Maybe you're thinking of popping the question, or maybe you're looking for earrings or bracelet or a custom piece that you want to have specifically made. Well, they can do all of those things at Schultz Jewelers. That's really what sets them apart. It's a relaxed environment, and they have every option available that you can imagine, from unique custom designs, top-rated permanent jewelry, and lab-grown diamonds. So it's not going to kill your wallet, which, let's be honest, we want to find the right value. They're going to have that and the right quality at Schultz Jewelers. Check them out at 2202 Dixie Highway in Fort Mitchell, just 5 minutes from the bridge into Kentucky. Also, make sure you check them out at schultzdiamonds.com. The Bengals strive for perfection. Schultz Jewelers does too, because when it has to be perfect, it has to be Schultz Jewelers.
Parker, Tyler Guyton is a guy that we've talked about on Twitter in the last few days, or when you were coming back from the Senior Bowl anyway. Jackson Powers Johnson, a guy that really made a name for himself in Mobile, and Tavondre Sweat, a guy that captured the imagination of both James and myself, and a guy that we've talked about on this show this week as well. But let's start with, or stay on the offensive tackle side of things. Tyler Guyton and Taliese Fuaga, the biggest name, I would say, tackles in Mobile. How did you come away with those two guys in terms of where you had them before, where you had them after, and what moved those evaluations, if anything, or confirmed what you thought about those players?
Yeah, so I'll start with Taliese Fuaga out of Oregon State. He played right tackle. I'm just trying to help people get familiar that aren't. But he's a guy that I came in really, not that I wasn't interested in watching him, but I really just came in to see him on day one and be like, oh, is this the guy that I think he is? And he's every bit of what everyone talks about him, where he's physical, he's aggressive, he's athletic. I do think he's got a little, he has length issues. He looks a little shorter limbed. I know his arms came in a little low. His legs seem to be short. He doesn't really have that length in his set. But his athleticism helps make up for a lot of things, and his aggression helps finish stuff that a lot of other guys just don't really have the energy or athletic capability to do. And so I think he was, through the first couple of days, one of the guys getting guys on the ground the most, and just really embodied everything that I thought he was as a prospect, just the mauler, man. And he's just fun to watch.
So is he someone you run to the podium to, casual jog, stroll?
Yeah, I think it really comes down for me at 18. If Newton's there, you go Newton, Jerzon Newton. But if Jerzon Newton's not there, it's Taliese Fuaga. He's the guy.
So it's that he would be your realistic number one tackle. Just put it that
for the
way.
Bengals board. Yeah, he'd be my guy.
The number one tackle on the Bengals board. Another guy I think that would be perhaps in that conversation. I don't know. We talked a little bit about the Marius Mims, Tyler Guyton topic, but Tyler Guyton was the guy at the Senior Bowl, also played right tackle at Oklahoma, was a transfer, a little bit of a late bloomer, a little bit older, working with Paul Alexander. We talked about Patrick Paul working with Duke Manyweather, also working with Orlando Brown, or has a relationship at least with Orlando Brown, former Oklahoma tackle as well. Where does Tyler Guyton stack up compared to Fuaga, and how are they different prospects?
Yeah, so Guyton is like the exact opposite from a physical profile, where he's tall and long and just has like the prototypical NFL tackle size, right? And that's where you get a lot of these guys that are like, oh, well, I can't coach size, so I might as well take a swing on the guy that has at least the measurables, and we can work on the technique. And Guyton was a guy that I really hoped would show me that he improved. I mean, obviously not drastically from the season ended just a couple months ago to now, but can show some improvement. A lot of these guys showed some significant improvement technically, and you can tell that they've obviously been working really hard to really clean up their profile coming into the process. And he just kind of seemed like the same player to me. And like I said, I'm really high on him just because of the size paired with his athletic profile. I think he's going to be a really good tester, and he moves really well. He's a strong guy. He's a competitor. He was one of the few guys getting like amped up after every single rep he took. I know it took him, I think, a full day. Oh, it might have only been half a session, but it took him a longer than he wanted to get a rep against Chris Braswell, who was an edge out of Alabama, because he knew he was one of the top prospects in his team that he was able to face off against. And he was looking forward to that matchup for a long time. When he finally got it, he got down in there, gave him the little high five before the rep, and then handshake after, tap on the head. And he's a big competitor. I love that drive out of guys. And just from a technical perspective, he's got really active feet, really quick feet for a guy at his size. His hands are the biggest question for me. And unfortunately, throughout the Senior Bowl, I did not fix that issue. I didn't come out of the Senior Bowl like, oh, wow, he really has improved hands. It's kind of like, is this like an issue we're just going to have to deal with? Is that something that can be cleaned up in an off season or two? Like you talked about being a late bloomer. I know that's a really big concern for some people. I don't really worry about that as much with these guys being able to have, 10 plus year careers if they can hit that level. But yeah, we'll see how it goes. I'm interested to see how he tests. He's a big guy. If he tests well, then I'm feeling confident to take the swing. I'd probably put him at 2 or 3, at the second or third offensive tackle for the Bengals specifically, in my opinion.
How do you think he would fit alongside this offensive line? Orlando Brown Jr., obviously on the other side, former Oklahoma tackle, like Jake mentioned. But one thing everyone has seemed to mention is the fact that the Bengals haven't used many premium picks on offensive linemen in the athleticism aspect. So does it come down to the testing for you for Guyton, as far as him being in contention for the 18th pick and him testing as well as you think?
I really think it's going to come. I mean, it's obviously going to be a couple factors, but the testing is so big for him, because if he can test well, like a top level tester in the class at that size, I just think that's something that you have to, it's almost worth the risk, in my opinion, especially in a year where I've talked about using this to kind of build on the draft position. How often are you going to be picking at 18? How often do you really invest draft capital into this position? Go get a long-term guy that you feel confident that you can work with. But as far as fit goes, I'd like to say he's going to fit really well with the group. I mean, you got Alex Kappa, who was next to Tristan Wirfs for at least I don't remember how long that relationship actually lasted, but a couple of seasons at least. So he's used to working next to a more athletic guy. And I've said for a while now that the Bengals need a guy in the room that can be that enforcer, that can be that aggressive play style type of guy. And bringing Guyton in, I think he is that guy and could be that guy, and that'd be a huge boost to the room, in my opinion. So that's where I think he'd bring a lot to the room that they're missing, and that's where I really like that pick. Him and Fuaga bring both of those things. That's why I really like both of those guys for the Bengals.
We'll make sure we wrap up any other tackles that Parker wants to mention. We'll also get to Jackson Powers-Johnson. We'll get to the defensive trenches, and we give Parker an opportunity to stand on the table for some of his guys to finish up the show coming up next.
Today's show is brought to you by Robinhood. Did you know that even if you have a 401k for retirement, you can still have an IRA? Robinhood has the only IRA that gives you a 3% boost on every dollar you contribute when you subscribe to Robinhood Gold. But get this, now through April 30th, Robinhood is boosting every single dollar you transfer from other retirement accounts with a 3% match. That's right, no cap on the 3% match. Robinhood Gold gets you the most for your retirement thanks to their IRA with a 3% match. This offer is good through April 30th. Get started at robinhood.com/boost. Subscription fees apply. And now for some legal info. Claim as of Q1 2024, validated by Radius Global Market Research. Investing involves risk, including loss. Limitations apply to IRAs and 401ks. 3% match requires Robinhood Gold for 1 year from the date of the 3% match. Must keep Robinhood IRA for 5 years. The 3% matching on transfers is subject to specific terms and conditions. Robinhood IRA available to U.S. customers in good standing. Robinhood Financial LLC, member SIPC, is a registered broker-dealer.
Parker, before we talk JPJ, before we talk defensive line and Tavondre Sweat, any other tackles that really stood out to you that you want to talk about as potential Bengals targets after what you saw from them at the Senior Bowl? One of the guys that I've seen a lot of people talking about, Jordan Morgan, a left tackle, came back from an ACL injury, played really well after an ACL injury. Some people would say better, was at the Senior Bowl as well. But are there any other tackles that you want to dive into and give some thoughts on for a Bengals fit before we talk about some of these other guys?
I don't know. I got a guy I'm saving for the end that I might just save for the end for now.
Okay. We'll let you stand on the table for him in a moment. Jackson Powers-Johnson. Any thoughts there? He obviously had a standout week, was one of the guys seen as a big winner pretty unanimously by those covering the Senior Bowl. Obviously, though, you have a positional value difference and a scarcity difference at interior offensive line versus tackle. And you could talk about Christian Haynes potentially as a later round target on the interior if the Bengals were so inclined. But positional versatility there potentially with JPJ. Did he really make a mark for himself for you? Did he change and elevate his profile in your eyes?
You know, I heard a lot of people talking about how he really, propelled himself into the first round conversation. I still see him as a solid second rounder, and that's not really a knock on what he did, but just more speaking to the talent pool of this draft. I just don't know if the value is there outside of positional need for Jackson Powers-Johnson. I really liked what he did. I thought he looked very strong. He's a guy where with his size, which is really good for the position, and what he's able to do with his hands, I'm really excited for what he can do. Again, multi-positional. He checks all the boxes, right? And the one thing that I thought was missing on his film was athleticism. I want to see him move well. I know there's a lot of people that talk about how he moved down the field. And I don't know if it's an Oregon offense thing or his play style type thing. I didn't really see a lot of athleticism in his game down at the Senior Bowl. So I'm really interested to see how he tests. Again, if he tests well, that'll be the final box for me, and I'll be there with him. But that's the one thing holding me back on him. With being at his size, I'd like to see him move a little better to be like that top-tier prospect that people are talking about. But I really like his game. I think he's a fun player to watch, has a great personality. But yeah, I'm not there with him athletically, but I really like what he does in every other aspect of the game. Love him as a prospect. He won't be my center one, but probably going to be my center two by the end of the process.
Yeah, there are, to me, outside of right tackle, there's still a need. And this is probably a need that should be filled in the draft for sure, because you're not sure exactly like Jackson Powers-Johnson might start for the Bengals at left guard if they drafted him 18th overall. But if you take a center guard combo on day 2, day 3, early day 3, that guy's probably not starting as a rookie. Are there any guys like that you like? Because I think that is a need, and that's something that they need to address. And ideally, it would be someone that could play center and guard and back up all 3 spots if possible.
Yeah, I've been a huge fan of Christian Haynes since I turned on the film, and I know a lot of people are going to be turned off by him just because of the measurables, but he plays outside of those constraints really well. He moves really well. And this week, and again, he was a guy I was super worried about his play strength because he showed it on film, but the games that I have access to right now, it wasn't the best competition. So I was like, oh, if I come into this week and come out of this week seeing him really like throw in that anchor, be able to stand some of these guys up and be a people mover in the run game, I'm going to be really excited about this kid. He did all of those things throughout the week. and he's a mauler. He's super aggressive. He's actually training with Tyler Guyton. So take that for what you will. But I love that kid, and he just is a hard worker and plays a lot bigger than he looks, and just has that play style that I love. And so he's a guy that checks all the boxes for me, and he's going to be a later round pick. I think he'll slide because of his measurables. And outside of him, I'm trying to think of guys. I mean, Zach Frazier's a guy that probably would have been a top guy for me in this class without the injury. But he's already ready to go. He was padded up on day one. I didn't see him do much of anything throughout the Senior Bowl. But it sounds like he's going to be a full participant at the Combine. He was a center out of West Virginia, and he's a guy that I see as a multi-positional guy as well, where I love his game. I love what he can do. Another guy that checks all the boxes for me. Should end up being probably a late third rounder, if not early day 3 type guy, just because of the profile and if he's really able to come back from that injury this fast. But yeah, he's a guy that I want to buy a lot of stock in.
Before we let you stand on the table, let's shift gears, talk defensive line really quick. T'Vondre Sweat, obviously the big standout to me. But as you were watching the defensive line, I'm curious to get your take. We were just talking to Mike Renner about the trenches as well. He mentioned that Christian Hayes, he thinks, is long levered despite his short height, which he thinks is potentially an upside for him at guard, which is interesting. We'll see how he measures and how he tests and everything. But on the defensive side of the ball, Mike Renner was a little disappointed for the most part outside of Sweat. What were your takeaways when you were watching the defensive line class, and did anyone stand out to you in a big way as a potential Bengals target?
Yeah, so the most interesting guy for me had to have been Brandon Dorless out of Oregon. I think he played a lot of edge out there, but he really mostly played inside at the Senior Bowl, and he was very dominant in the one-on-one periods. However, we got the team, and it was like, he'd be very hit and miss. My favorite guy out of the entire D-line group, and it sounds like this is pretty, consensus, but Braden Fisk, I call him Brandon all week. Braden Fisk out of Florida State is an absolute monster. He seemed unblockable at times. People just couldn't handle it, man. And he was just fun to watch. Sounds like from everyone I talked to, he was a great interview. Again, another high character guy. People just loved hanging out with him. He interacted with fans every time he got the opportunity to. Just a great guy, great demeanor, but just a monster on the field. And those are just guys you love to see. And I'm excited to see what he's able to do at the next level. But he's probably my defensive line winner of the week instead of T'Vondre Sweat.
So if they took him day 2, you'd be pretty excited?
I would be absolutely amped if they took him day 2.
The one thing I'll call out about Fisk, of course, fifth-year senior, was a transfer. And that's
Aegis Jake. It's that time of year.
He hates these old guys, man.
I don't in a vacuum, but it's a factor that you have to consider when comparing a guy that maybe is a junior playing against the same level of competition compared to a guy that's 2 years older. It's just in that time frame of life. Think about your life between ages 18 and 23 and how much physical development occurs in that period of life. And that's also true for these guys in college football. But Parker, we said we were going to let you stand on the table. You can have a couple of guys. I think Fisk is one of your guys. That was a little bit of standing on the table, but not necessarily as passionate as you might get about this other guy. I don't know who it is. Go ahead, get up on that table.
Yeah, no, a guy that I thought was a huge riser this week that I'd seen some people talk about, but just that I really loved his game and needed to see him tune some things up this week, and he did, was Kingsley Suamatea out of BYU. He played both tackles a lot all week and played both at a very high level, especially towards the end of the week. He showed an impressive anchor, and he's a crazy athlete, man. And so my biggest concern coming in was he just played really out of control and really leaned on that athleticism on film. And even earlier, like his day 1 wasn't great, but his day 2 and 3 were spectacular. And he explodes off the ball. Just getting to the second level, he just is easy for him. He handles linebackers like it's nothing. And I just really came into the week needing to see him like, hey, let's settle in pass protection-wise. Don't just worry about being athletic and mirroring guys. Really get hands-on, be powerful, set that anchor, really just own some guys in pass protection. He did that through day 2 and 3, was getting guys on the ground, was really just, he had very tight hands, wasn't as wild and crazy as I'd seen him on film, played a lot more under control, even at the second level, is a people mover in the run game. I just think he does everything well. And I saw him come up on a lot of people's boards throughout the week, and he's really impressed. I still don't think he's going to be in the first round conversation because he's still very raw as a prospect. But if you can get him into a building and really tune him up, I think he can really be a monster at the next level.
So Kingsley Sumatea, round 2. Brock Bowers, round 1. You're a big Brock Bowers guy. You go with I'm already losing his name. Hold on here.
Fisk?
Christian Haynes,
Oh,
round
wow.
4. I'm just trying to find your guys, Parker.
Yeah, I mean, Brock Bowers is definitely not my first round pick, but you're more than welcome to keep telling people that so I can look like a genius when he goes that early.
Me and Parker have been texting about Brock Bowers for a while. He's anti-Brock. I'm all in.
But if the Bengals could end up with Sue Matea and Haynes, like it would obviously increase the athleticism in the room, 100-fold. It feels like at times. But those are just, I don't know, man. Those are guys with really high ceilings that if you can maximize that, then you're going to have some real studs in this group.
And that's what the Bengals have to figure out with the floor ceiling conversation, what kind of players they want to take, if they're guys that maybe need development time or how ready they are to hit the ground running. Some fun facts on Kingsley Suamatea: played both tackles at BYU, played left and right tackle, was apparently a 5-star recruit, but a cousin to the Sewells, Penei Sewell's cousin, and was a high school teammate of Puka Nacua, which I thought was interesting as well. Some good NFL connections there for Kingsley Suamatea. And if he's showing some improvement technically, could be a very fun prospect to talk about throughout the process. Parker, we appreciate the time and you sharing your experience down in Mobile, some of the guys that stood out to you. Excited to see your evaluations as the draft process goes on. Of course, you can find Parker on Twitter and all of his work at ParkerBlake60. You can find some of his writing over at allbengals.com as well. So make sure you check out Parker's work. Give him a follow on Twitter. And that's going to do it for this episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. Until next time, thanks for listening. Hoo day, and have a good one.